Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2100. So 2100, that's a lot. The topic is mindset, and the title is, What Did You Expect? I'm working my way right now through an audio book titled Solve for Happy by Mo Gawdat. It's Gawdat is his last name. And dude's awesome. I've really enjoyed. I watched a interview of Mo on the Diary of a CEO podcast with Stephen Bartlett. It was a really, really, really good podcast. My wife and I were listening to it while we were driving. It was very insightful, very interesting information, so we decided to get Mo's book. So we've been listening to it on the drive, and I'm going to be finishing it up while I work out this week and the upcoming week. The book discusses how to be happy. How can we be more happy in life? Now, I have not finished the book, but I'm fired up by it. I really like the content, and I wanted to share 3 lessons I've learned so far. I will definitely be coming back and making like a final kind of wrap-up podcast on this. I'm actually considering making this book the first recommendation that I have for clients. I have podcasts that I ask them to listen to help them better understand the process they're going to be going through. But I believe this book would be an invaluable resource. And I want to explain through the book and then give the reason why. So the 3 takeaways I have so far is happiness is when what happens meets or exceeds our expectations or wants. So let me unpack that for a second. An example, a quick, easy example is this actually happened to my wife and I. We were changing some landscaping in the front yard, and we had hydrangea bushes planted before we went on a week-long trip down to Miami. We live in South Carolina. It was over 90 degrees every day, and we were like, oh crap, no one's going to be here to water these things. We just got them planted, and now we have to leave. They're probably going to die. So we went on the trip. We found out that it actually rained a couple days while we were gone. Perfect. So we wanted the rain. The rain happened. We were happy. So what we wanted happened. Therefore, we're happy. Let's give a more complex example of rain. Is your daughter is turning 13. She's officially becoming a teenager. That's a huge birthday, right? That's a big one. You want to really show up for her. You want to do well. For some reason, she decides on a carnival theme, and you're like, sure, okay. And the main request being a horse, of course, right? So you get a few blow-up party stations. You even rent a horse for the day to take the kids on some low-key walks. No sprinting, no running. No one's going to die in your backyard. Just some nice walks. You got a trainer and everything. You look at the forecast on Monday before the Saturday party, and you're like, Saturday looks to be good weather. Everything's good to go. Okay, I'll go ahead and, make the payments and make the arrangements for the blow-up party. You call the trainer. Maybe you can't get a hold of them on Monday, but finally you get a call back on Tuesday, and you looked at the weather report, and you're like, oh, crap. Now all of a sudden it's calling for rain on Tuesday, like on Saturday, but it's calling for the rain now Tuesday morning, and you're like, oh, no, what do I do, So you talk to horse trainer, and they're like, well, we can schedule it, but I need to have a deposit by Thursday. So you check the weather app on Thursday, and now all of a sudden it says the weather on Saturday is going to be great. So you're happy again. So you went from being happy to being sad, but now you're back to being happy, and it hasn't even rained yet, right? So you pay the money, then you check Friday morning, and it says rain again. Oh, crap. So now we're back to being unhappy. Saturday morning comes, it sprinkles in the morning. You're overwhelmed. You don't know what to do. You can't just bring all the blow-up devices inside your house. There's way too many people coming to be in your house. Can't fit the horse in your house. What in the world are you going to do, right? But thankfully, the rain kind of fades away in the morning. It actually lessened the humidity, and it made for a great day. What's interesting about that example is the rain hadn't even happened, and you were happy, unhappy before the event even came, right? So in these examples, you had wants and or expectations. You had this what ifs that the rain would happen or it wouldn't happen, and you were only going to be sad or happy if it happened the way you wanted it to happen. So it's fleeting, right? Like our happiness it feels as though it's outside of our control, in that, if the weather can change my happiness, how much can I control that? Because I can't control the weather. Here's another example, and this actually happened. So my wife and I, with our new dog Daisy, we had to put her in a boarding service while we were in Chicago. So we went there, we paid for like the bougie room where you have a camera and she has like this outdoor patio she can walk into. And then they say there's going to be group play from 9 to 4. And you're like, okay, that's awesome. She's super social. She doesn't like small rooms. So this will be great. She'll be out of the room for most of the day. She's going to be playing with other dogs. She loves other dogs. This is going to be fantastic. But when you watch the cameras that they have for pet owners to see their dogs, you find out that your dog was only out of the room for about an hour and a half to 2 hours a day. And this actually did happen. So this was extremely frustrating. We were actually calling the place and being like, yo, what's up? What's going on? So when we returned from the trip, you go to the boarding place and you're like, hey, what's going on? What happened? There was an agreement and the prices were agreed upon. So not only just like word of honor, like where they say they're going to do something and they do or don't, but also you pay money for 7 hours of playtime a day, but Daisy only got maybe 2. So we were like, this is some bullshit, like we are now expecting an apology and maybe a price reduction, but the apology was more so what we wanted. And we didn't even want it for us. We wanted the apology for Daisy. Daisy's not going to be able to understand the apology, but I'm like, if you apologize to anybody, you should apologize to Daisy. She had to be in a room for over 20 hours a day. That's freaking ridiculous. And we were super frustrated, very angry. So our expectation is that they didn't fulfill their end of the bargain. So there's going to be something, right? There's going to be an acknowledgement of that. An apology, maybe even a price reduction. So you expect to be treated fairly, or however you are defining fairly. But you're not. So now you're unhappy. So when our wants and or our expectations do not match what happens to us, we are unhappy. This actually is interesting to note because we can increase our happiness if we carefully craft our expectations and wants. If we can control our expectations, we can better control our happiness. Now, what does that look like in application? Number one would be plan multiple options. So if you go back to your daughter's 13th birthday, maybe you have the outside party plan, but maybe you can figure out something to do. Okay, if that doesn't work, we can do plan B. And then all of a sudden you're more in control of your happiness, whether it rains or doesn't rain. That one might be a little bit harder to make. You can't bring the blow up toys inside and the torch inside, but you would try to think of different options. The one that would be easier would be the hydrangea bushes. You can call a friend, you can call we had the number for the person who helped us plant the bushes and redo some of our landscaping, and they even offered to water the plants for us if we asked. Thankfully, it rained. We didn't need to. But that was an option. And having multiple options can reduce unhappiness because we feel like we have more control. If something we don't want to happen feels as though it's about to happen, we would make the other option a choice, and therefore we have better control, we have better happiness. So you want to make multiple options, have multiple choices as much as you possibly can. So for us with Daisy, we have looked into other boarding services, even a lady who does in-home one-on-one boarding. She had a dog for 14 years that unfortunately passed away. So one of her ways to kind of honor her dog was to be a host for dogs whenever their owners were going on trips. So she wasn't quite ready to get another pet herself, but she could handle someone else's pet for a week or a weekend. And that's pretty awesome. I really like that. So that's what we're doing is we're looking for multiple options. This is going to allow us, even after the fact, to be happier because we now feel as though we have more control over the future. So even if the thing has already happened, you can still feel a degree of happier by just simply believing that you have more control over the future of whether that thing will happen again. So planning multiple options is huge. Then when it comes to expectations, this is going to sound kind of funny, but aim for middle of the road. If you expect everything to be perfect, hint, hint, it won't, and then you're going to be disappointed and unhappy all the time. If you expect life to be absolute shit, so if you're like, I'm going to expect nothing, well, then you're just kind of like meandering through life in this crappy mode of waiting for crap to happen. That's not fun, right? So you want to like hedge your bets a little bit, like aim for kind of middle of the road. Think that things are going to be good. You know, maybe they're not going to be great. They're probably not going to be the worst thing in the world, but they'll be good. That sounds like depressing. There's a commercial, I forget what product it's for, but Meredith and I saw it pop up in some ads when we were watching a movie or TV or something, and it was like a couple months ago. But it was some kind of thing for maybe a sleeping pillow or a bed or something, and it said, do you want to wake up and feel good? And we were dying laughing, because if you're selling a product, say you're selling a bed, and you're like, we want the people who sleep on this bed to wake up and feel good. Like you would say great, typically, right? You want them to feel great. You want them to feel amazing. You want to feel the best they've ever felt in your life. But the company was like, well, that's not going to happen. So let's not set the customer expectation at amazing. Let's just set it at good. So that was their selling point was, do you want to wake up and feel good? And we were just laughing because it was so middle of the road, but it was absolutely perfect. So it was a great example. And then the third thing on how do we apply this concept of managing our expectations and wants is, if you are unhappy, this is going to sound again kind of funny, but remember, it could have been worse. So as goofy as this sounds, is when something unhappy happens to you and you're like, damn, that was kind of crappy. That didn't meet my expectations. I'm a little upset. I'm a little unhappy. You can actually increase your happiness by saying, well, it could have been worse. Maybe you don't want to play the game of how it could have been worse, because that can cause anxiety. But often what happens to us, there is some degree of worse. I mean, the ultimate worst is we could have died, right? So something likely could have been worse. And even if our middle of the road expectations aren't met, we can at least remember it could have been worse. Now, these are hysterical to me because typically life coaches and all the gurus and stuff you hear, all the messages you hear is now the term is toxic positivity, but they're like, aim for the stars, if you work hard, you can achieve anything, blah, 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 blah. And it's it sets this culture of you should just always be happy all the time, ever. If you're not happy, something's wrong with you. You're a loser, or you have problems, you have emotional problems. Why aren't you just happy all the time? That's ridiculous. But no one usually tells you to aim for middle of the road. But it does actually help. It actually is helpful to remember things could have been worse. And what I want to come from this, I want good and great things, but I'm okay with X, even if it isn't, X times 2 or X plus, something, right? So if somebody wants to work to be the NBA, they probably don't want to be like, I'm going to go to the NBA and I'm going to break all of LeBron James records. That would be kind of a little lofty. So maybe if you're in high school, you can just say, hey, can I be a starter on the varsity team? Can I get a college scholarship to a D1 or D2 college? Can I be a starter at college? Can I even enter the draft with some hope of being drafted? Maybe not even top pick, first round. Can you just be drafted? Then when you're drafted, you'd be like, okay, can I at least work into a starting role? If I can get into a starting role, can I at least become an all-star? I mean, there's just layers and layers and layers and layers, right? That's how you want to set these expectations up, is you take it step by step by step by step. The second lesson is that you can choose to be happy. Happiness is a choice. Now, what's funny is when Mo was saying this in the interview, the person he was doing the interview with, Stephen Bartlett, they laughed because they knew statistically they would lose about 8% of their listeners the second they made that statement. So statistically, I likely just lost 8% of my listeners to this podcast by saying happiness is a choice. They said the reason why people don't want to hear that is because they don't know how to make that choice yet. So therefore, they're frustrated to hear that because they're unhappy. They don't know how to make themselves unhappy. So when you say happiness is a choice, they hear that you are telling them, you're blaming them for being unhappy. That is not the case. That is definitely not what I would intend with the way I'm saying it. What I would say is that by listening to this book, by practicing these skill sets, you can influence your happiness. You can be a little less unhappy, a little more often, right? So you can just bring happiness into your life a little more often. That is a sense of control. By learning how to influence that control, you're then making a choice whether you implement that influence or not. So therefore, you can influence your happiness. That is a choice. So let's again look at this. So happiness is a balance of wants and expectations versus reality. We cannot always control what happens to us, but we can control what we expect and then how we respond when something happens. So we talked about how we can control our expectations already. Plan multiple options, aim for middle of the road, and remember, it could have been worse. So how do we manage our response? The response is not easy. I'll tell you that it's simple in concept, but good God, this is not easy to just flip a switch and do. So first thing is to acknowledge the feelings. If you're unhappy, say, am I unhappy? Yes. Am I frustrated? Yes. Am I overwhelmed? Yes. Am I mad and I want to punch somebody in the face? Yes. So give yourself that, acknowledgement. Don't try to bury the feelings. Don't try to hide the feelings. Don't try to pretend that you don't feel them. You feel them. That's okay that you feel them. Just acknowledge that and let's move to the second step. The second step is, can I do anything about it? So if I'm mad, what can I do about it? Now, you want to think through what the consequences of your actions might be. So I'll give you a little insight. If you're listening to this podcast, I appreciate you very much, and I'm assuming that if you were to have judged me as a person, you would have done so already. So I'll give you a little insight into my mind. When Meredith and I were at the dog boarding place, and they were not apologizing or giving any recognition that things were different, Meredith and I were upset. We were frustrated. And part of me was, hey, I'm 6 foot tall, 280 pound male. I can just walk in the back, grab Daisy, and we can just leave. No one's going to stop me. If they tried, it wouldn't go well if I got angry enough. So I could just get Daisy, and we could just leave. We don't have to pay a dime. But that wouldn't have been a good idea because there's cameras everywhere. They'd have cameras on us not paying, getting our dog, and walking out. They would have all of our personal information because we had to give them all that to drop off Daisy. So they know our full first, last names. They know our home address. They know our cell phone numbers. So they could call the cops. The cops could come get us. And all of a sudden I spend a night in jail. I'm sure there's some kind of fine. Then we have to pay the full amount anyhow, right? So when you think, can I do anything about it? You definitely want to think of the consequences of what you would do. So this is a fun little game is, can I do anything about it? And if so, what's the best option? So the best option would not have been for me to get mad and just walk back, get Daisy, and leave. That would not have been a good idea. But also paying the bill, saying and doing nothing, and just harboring that anger inside of us, that doesn't feel like a good idea either, right? That's just going to eat us up and we're going to be mad. So what can we do about it? Well, we can contact the franchise owner, make sure they're aware of the situation. If we don't get a satisfactory response there, we could be, grumpy Gus's and contact a Better Business Bureau, or we can make a negative review on Google. But that's also something interesting because Brutal Iron Gym is a business. So if I trash someone else and they don't like that, they're going to possibly trash me. So like there's layers to things. You got to think about all this stuff. But it's still your freedom to think through them. It's still your freedom of choice whether you want to make an action or not. Now let's say that you go through the process of acknowledging your feelings. You acknowledge it, it's there. You then say, can I do anything about it? And what if the answer is no? You can't do anything about it. So for example, for Mo, you'll learn about this in the first sentence of the book. So spoiler alert, but it's not going to ruin the book for you, I promise. His son passes away. And you can't do anything about that. You can't do anything about when someone passes away. Can't write an angry letter. You can't complain to God and he's going to put your child back or whatever your religious belief is. You can't really do anything about it. So then the next question becomes, well, how can I move on in spite of it happening? How can I move on maybe using it as motivation? How can I still have happiness after this? And that's a hard question. When someone you love passes away, you might struggle with feeling guilty, trying to be happy after they're gone. That's huge. That's a huge issue for a lot of people. Are you allowed to be happy? Do you have the right to be happy? I mean, what does that say about you? What does it look, to others if you're happy after they've passed away, right? There's a lot to unpack there. Like the book, Mo decided to write the book and do his project of happiness because of his son. And that was his way of responding to the situation was, I can't bring my son back, but I can make my son's legacy enormous. I can make my son's life impact millions of others. So those are the 3 steps on how we manage our response. So we said we can manage our expectations by planning multiple options, aim for middle of the road, remember it could have been worse. We can manage our response by acknowledging our feelings, saying it's okay to have these feelings, asking if we can do anything about it, and if we can, go do it. But if you can't, ask, how can I move on despite of this? How can I use it as motivation, or how can I find happiness even though this has happened? And then the third point I want to make from this book is the concept of absence versus management. Being happy isn't that you never feel unhappy, that you never feel sad, you never feel angry or frustrated or oppressed or anxious. Being happy is that you feel all of those things, but you feel them for the shortest time possible. So happiness is, if you think of the totality of what we can feel, you want to spend more time feeling happy. It's not that you will spend all of your time feeling happy. You will still feel unhappy, sad, angry, frustrated, depressed, anxious, overwhelmed. You're going to still feel every negative emotion in life. But the hope, the goal is that you can mitigate how often you feel them by managing wants and expectations, and you can mitigate how intensely and the duration of which you feel them by managing your response. So happiness comes from learning how to manage negative emotions, not from the absence of negative emotions. So as I said, I'm likely going to make this actually the first recommendation that I have for clients. I want to basically help clients better align their expectations of what is going to happen to their experience. Because often the clients who have the largest changes to make, their current habits are the furthest away from what they need their habits to be. And then these clients tend to often make the lowest percentage of change. So maybe they're only able to, eat a healthy, happy breakfast 1 or 2 out of 7 days. Maybe they're supposed to eat a bigger lunch so they don't overeat at night, but they only get a lunch in 1 or 2 of the 7 days of a week. They tend to be the most unhappy. They had the largest changes to make. They made the least amount of changes. And they're the most unhappy. To me, that sounds counterintuitive. Because you had the furthest change to make, you did the least amount of change. What else did you expect? What did you expect? If you had the most change to make, you did the least amount of change. What did you expect? Like, how would you have expected things to be any good if we haven't done really any of the work? If our amount of change, if our amount of work is a very low percentage, it would make sense that the outcome would be a low percentage. But that's not what I see. What I see is often the clients who have the largest changes to make, who then make the least amount of changes, they're the most unhappy. Because they expect big changes, but they don't actually think of the fact that they have to do them. Like, they're the one that has to make that change. So they're either disconnected in the sense that, like, I want this big outcome, and they're not connecting that to, I have to do this big effort. And or they're just unaware of the significance of the effort that's required. It's not that the people, like, I'm not saying this to anyone and saying, like, wow, they're dumb. Like, that's not, I've been in this stage of my life. So I promise you, like, I've gone through every stage of every client has ever gone through. In regards to the generalities. So, for example, when I first hated my body and I wanted to make changes, I was 15 years old. I was like, I'm going to do 250 push-ups and 250 sit-ups every night. 250 push-ups is going to help me build a bigger chest and arms like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And then doing 250 sit-ups every night is going to help me get a six-pack. Did that work? Hell no. Hell no. Good God. No. And how the hell did I expect that to work? Bodyweight exercises isn't going to build you a chest like somebody who bench presses like 400, 500 pounds. And doing a bunch of sit-ups isn't going to lose belly fat. That just trains the muscle that's under your fat. So, duh, like absolute freaking duh that wasn't going to work. But at the time, I didn't know that stuff. So to me, that made 100% sense. That was 100% logical. I did it. I got it 355 out of 365 days. I hit that goal. 10 of the days I was on a Boy Scout trip and I was too embarrassed to do it in front of my friends. So I freaking put in the work. But did it work? No, absolutely not. I was also anorexic. I only ate one meal a day and trying to burn off that many calories. I had no freaking clue what I was doing. So I have been in the place where I expected big changes. They didn't happen, so then I was big unhappy. Right? What's unfortunate, though, is when you get that response, that unhappiness response, people often quit. And then they never make progress. They never get out of unhappy. So when you start a process like a diet change, a training change, when you want to, accomplish a big goal, you should expect to be uncertain in the process. You're not going to necessarily know if what you're doing is right all the time. You should expect to make learning mistakes, meaning you try and it still doesn't go well. Whether that's in the big picture or the small picture. Maybe, I tried to eat well at lunch, but I realized I made a mistake afterwards. Well, that's a learning mistake. You should expect those to happen. You should also expect to have to do things when you don't want to do them. Cook at night for the next day when you're too damn tired to stand. I have fallen asleep standing up cooking before. You will have to do things you don't want to do. And when you don't want to do them. That's part of the process, right? And you should expect that sometimes you just won't. Sometimes you're just going to choose not to do it. And you have to live with that choice. You have to manage that choice. You have to manage like, man, I was kind of a lazy piece of crap right there and I just didn't do that. I have to be okay with that right now, but I also have to figure out how to manage that and not do that again. These are all things we should expect. We should expect a process, not an on-off switch. We're not going to start on a big goal and just switch. Everything turns on. Everything goes perfect. Hell no. You should expect a process. So expect uncertainty. Expect learning mistakes. Expect to do things when you don't want to do them. And expect that you won't. Sometimes you're just going to choose not to do it. You're going to make a poor choice. You're going to make a bad choice. That's just part of the process. You got to learn from it and try not to do that again. If we can set more realistic expectations, we can better control our happiness through the process, which leads to better long-term improvement, long-term adherence, and better long-term success. So I encourage you already. I'm only halfway through the book, but I'm like, hell yeah, I'm fired up and excited. So definitely check out the book Solve for Happy by Mo Gawdat, Gawdat. If you're one of my clients, I'm going to be asking you to read and listen to this book by the time I finish it, so you might as well get started. If you're going to be one of my clients, get started. If you have no desire to work with me, still get started. It's still going to be really helpful. I promise this book will be a good thing in your life. It's going to give you some interesting food for thought. It's going to help you have a better belief in the fact that you can control your happiness to at least some degree. Awesome. If you have any questions, if you need anything, reach out on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. There's a contact us page. Send me a message anytime. I get back to everybody within 2 weeks. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. The more people we share it with, the more people can help. If you like the podcast, please consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on our website. And then if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.